In this Granblue Fantasy Relink video, I'm going to be talking about my hands-on impressions with the demo that just came out today. If you haven't played it yet and you like what you see during this video, highly recommend going to download it on PlayStation 5 and checking it out. I had a lot of fun with it. So let's get into, what kind of Granblue Fantasy Relink really is about. So first of all, during the demo, there are basically two modes that you can play besides like a 10-minute tutorial that kind of teaches you the mechanics and controls of the game. There's a story mode, and then there's like a quest mode. I'll get into the quest mode in a minute, but let's talk about the main campaign first. In the demo, there was really not a lot to play in the main story. I think they're kind of holding this back for full release so people don't get spoiled on it. There is a bit of a video that plays after you complete the main storyline that kind of teases like what the story is about or some things that are coming in the story. And there's really not a lot here. I mean, you get to play through just the very beginning, what seems to be the very beginning cutscene, and then play a little bit of gameplay, get into an arena area, fight a boss, and then it's kind of like the demo's over. So you really don't get a sense of how the story's going to play. There are a couple dialogue options within that period, but really nothing substantial. I don't think they impact the game in any way. So it's really hard to get a sense of how the campaign is going to play. But so far, it feels like the story is very much linear on rails, that you're kind of just progressing the story and doing the things that, the story is telling you to do, which is kind of typical of JRPGs in general. And, as the story progresses, you're fighting through enemies, you're meeting different NPCs, plot points from the story are unfolding, and then what really seems to be the focus of this game is the big boss battles, that ultimately culminate in certain sections into big boss battles. There seem to be a lot of them and a variety of different types with unique mechanics that remind me a lot of Monster Hunter or like raid bosses in a MMO like Final Fantasy XIV or something like that. That seems to be the main focus of the gameplay aspect. So then the other mode is like a quest mode where you kind of like go to a hub and then you go up and talk to a person, pick up a quest, and it tells you the difficulty and what your goals are. Reminds me a lot of Monster Hunter in that sense. Very similar flow there, and then you can party with up to 3 other players to take on that mission if you want, or you can do it by yourself with AI. And this just really feels like Monster Hunter to me. Like, you go out and you do these missions. A lot of times it's fighting like a boss in an arena. You're fighting them, you take it down, and then you all get a score, and there's a ranking. It just has a real Monster Hunter feel to it. So that's kind of the, the sense of the game so far. You're going to have like a big long campaign that you can do, or it looks like you're just maining the main character and the other characters are supporting you. There may be areas of the game where you switch characters, but that was not in the demo. And then when you go and you do the quest, you can kind of pick the character that you want to play from a list of about 10 or 12 characters. I don't know if more are going to be added or whatever. And they all have their own skills and abilities, etc. And then you'll go and do like co-op fighting a boss or doing like waves of enemies in an arena, something like that. So I want to talk about what I like and I don't like so far from what I've seen. Again, this is just like a 1 to 2 hour demo, so I don't have like a huge sense of everything. But let's talk about what I don't like first. The first thing that I don't like is the camera angle. When you first start playing this game, the camera angle is very likely to make you feel a little bit motion sick. It swings around a lot. Its angle is very kind of close to you, and it takes a little bit to get used to, and particularly because the lock-on seems to jump around, like you can really get motion sick real quick. And I think some players are going to have a hard time with that, particularly ones that do get motion sick easily playing the game. And I kind of wish this was handled a little bit better. It's not terrible, you get used to it, but when you're first playing, it can be a lot. The next thing, which shouldn't be as a huge surprise, is that the English voiceover for this is kind of mediocre at best. It's not great, it's not terrible, but it's passable. Obviously, the Japanese voiceover is where it's at in this game. English was kind of a second thought, which is pretty typical of, animated anime-type games, etc. So I think that's not too much of a surprise. I guess I was hoping that it would be a bit better than it is, because recently we have seen some anime games that have decent English voiceovers. And unfortunately, this just isn't one of them. And then really the last negative point is kind of a small one, but one that, I think some players would want to know about, is that some of the enemies feel really damage spongy in my opinion so far. And some of this is because, I haven't optimized my combo rotation. I'm new to the game and I'm making mistakes in terms of like cranking out the most DPS possible. They'd probably go down a lot faster if I was more proficient. But there is sort of a damage spongy feel to some of the enemies. And I think even if you're like a super optimized player, you're going to feel this a little bit parts of the game. So let's get into the pros now that we've gone through the cons. First thing is the visuals of the game. Really love the art style. I like the sort of combination between like I don't know, something like Final Fantasy 14 meets Blue Protocol, something like that. It has a very anime-esque art style that I really, really enjoy. The animations are good. They're flashy. The world looks cool. You want to explore it. It doesn't feel like every other video game you've ever played. Next thing I really love about the game is the combat and the controls. They're so smooth. They're fluid. They feel really good. Your character does what you want it to do, with the exception of the camera locking onto something randomly periodically, because I mentioned that earlier. Like, otherwise, your character is doing exactly what you want when you want. There doesn't seem to be any delay. There's no, like, weird clunkiness or anything like that. And under the hood of this game, there's, like, a Monster Hunter game in there. And, you know, Monster Hunter's games are very deliberate in the way they attack, and sometimes, for some people, can feel a little bit slower and clunkier. This game's the polar opposite of that. It's like Monster Hunter on steroids with the speed that you're flying around the screen. And I really, really enjoy that. I think it's really, really fun. It's a bit different. That doesn't mean I don't love Monster Hunter or anything like that. I love Monster Hunter for what it is. But this is a little bit different bread and butter, and I really like it. And the next thing that I really love is the character customization. If you're talking about this game being like sort of an under-the-radar Monster Hunter type game, or like under all of the mechanics, there's basically a Monster Hunter type game in there, I feel like your character has more customization than Monster Hunter games typically have. Monster Hunter games come down to, you know, ultimately like what weapon you're using, and maybe the gems and the, you know, the armor kind of dictate how you're playing. But like one hammer user to another hammer user, they're not playing very differently. Whereas you could have two of the same character in this game, because they have different skills, they could play differently, even though they're the same character. And there are multiple characters to pick from. There's many characters. I think there's like 10 in the demo that you can play, and they all have different skills, different elements tied to them. So your strategy when you're going into these fights is going to be drastically different depending on what character you're playing, and then you might see variety between characters as well, and what weapons they're using, and etc. all play a part of that. So I feel like if you didn't feel like there was enough customization in Monster Hunter, or you just really love, you know, customizing your character, making builds and stuff like that, I feel like Granblue Fantasy Relink is going to have a good amount of that in it. And the next point is that the boss variety seems like it's going to be fairly substantial. Now, you don't see a ton of bosses in the demo. I think you experience like 3 or 4 bosses. They're all different. But again, they do play this sort of cinematic, like after you back out to the main menu, that kind of showcases a lot of the bosses that are going to be in the game. There are some spoilers in that video, so if you don't want to see them, obviously, you know, skip this section or whatever. But that boss variety looks very substantial. The bosses don't look similar to me at all. They look very different. So the way that you're fighting these bosses is going to be different, and they all have their own unique mechanics. And, you know, someone mentioned to me that, you know, some of them, like towards the very end of the game, or the end game areas, are going to be kind of like on par with normal Final Fantasy 14 like raid bosses. I don't know if that's true or not, but from what I've seen so far, I could definitely see that being the case. So there's some complexity there. There's some nuance to the way you're fighting these things. They're not just all like damage sponges where you're running in and just hacking them to death. You do have to like learn the mechanics of these fights and adjust to them, and, you know, maybe bring a character that's healing everyone and buffing everyone, and like plan for some of these harder boss encounters, which I think is really, really cool. And the last thing should come to no surprise. It's not a huge point. It's just that the Japanese voice acting is very good. Obviously, you expect this. Shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. I really enjoy the voice acting in Japanese. If you're playing, highly urge you to check out the Japanese voice acting, even if you don't watch a lot of anime, and see if it sounds better to you than the English. There are a lot of audio cues that get called out during combat that I can see why someone might want to play in English, but if that's not an issue for you, highly recommend checking out the Japanese voice acting. So in conclusion so far, I really enjoyed the demo of Granblue Fantasy Relink. I think if you are interested in Monster Hunter type games, you like anime art style type games, you like games like Final Fantasy 14, you should probably check it out. Just go play it and see what you think. I mean, it's free if you have a PS5. Go play it, see if it's something that you would be interested in, and, you know, go make that decision for yourself. But so far, I've really, really liked what I've played. I can't wait to play more. And that co-op element is really, really fun, doing the, you know, the big monster battles together. I really, really enjoy that. I think that's what made Monster Hunter so good for me, was the co-op monster hunting. And now you're fighting like basically like raid bosses together in certain missions. And that's, you know, that's the best part for me in MMOs, is those hard boss fights, raid bosses, or whatever, where you're figuring out the mechanics together and, you know, changing up your strategies, etc. I really, really enjoyed that so far in this game. Can't wait to see more of that. So what do you guys think from the gameplay? Have you played it yet? Did you play the demo? What do you think? Are you guys excited for this game that comes out on February 1st? Let me know in the comments below.